Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to imagine ourselves transported back 1,000 years to the chilling, rugged landscapes of Viking Scandinavia. Picture the biting wind whipping across your face, the smell of wood smoke and cured fish in the air, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It's a world far removed from our climate-controlled homes and instant entertainment. We modern humans probably won't survive this. Their lives were harsh, brutal, and often short, and every aspect of their existence, including their most intimate relationships, was shaped by the unforgiving realities of their environment and culture. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you're truly generous and supportive of what we do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's boring story journey. The common image of Vikings often conjures up horned helmets, which, by the way, were absolutely not a thing. Sorry to burst that bubble, folks. Fierce warriors and long ships plundering distant shores. But beneath the axes and adventures, these were people with complex lives, families, and yes, vibrant, intimate relationships. We're not talking about some soft-focus, romanticized version of love, though. This was a world where survival was paramount, and every social interaction, including who you married or slept with, often had practical implications. Marriage wasn't just about finding your soulmate. It was a strategic alliance, a way to secure land, forge political ties, or even settle feuds. Think less happily ever after and more mutually beneficial merger. For the average Viking, life revolved around the farm, the community, and the ever-present threat of scarcity or violence. Daily tasks were grueling. You weren't swiping left or right to find a date. You were probably too busy trying to keep your livestock alive through a brutal winter or defending your homestead from a rival clan. The idea of dating, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. Relationships were often formed through negotiations between families, sometimes when the prospective bride and groom were still quite young. It sounds a bit like an arranged corporate takeover, doesn't it? But experts are still analyzing, but netizens have already declared firmly that while families arranged things, there was still room for personal connection, even affection to grow within those established bonds. It wasn't always a cold, calculated transaction. Sometimes they even, gasp, liked each other. Crazy, right? An important historical event that shaped these societal norms was the introduction of Christianity in various parts of Scandinavia, though it was a gradual process. Before widespread conversion, traditional Norse beliefs held sway, and these often had a more pragmatic, less rigid view of sexual morality compared to later Christian doctrines. For example, while monogamy was generally the norm for formal marriages, concubinage was not uncommon, especially for powerful men. Remember dragon milk tea, that calming blend you used to love? Well, imagine the Vikings trying to relax with something similar after a day of raiding and then discussing their multiple partners over a horn of mead. The point is, their moral compass pointed in a slightly different direction than what we'd recognize today, driven by necessity and ancient customs rather than a singular, universally enforced religious code. This fluidity in what was considered acceptable is a fascinating aspect of their intimate lives.
So you've seen the rough and tumble setup of Viking society. Now let's get down to the brass tacks of Viking marriage. Because it wasn't less about hard eyes emojis and more about, well, stakes. Literally. Imagine a medieval version of a merger agreement, complete with detailed clauses and mutual benefits. When a Viking man decided he wanted a wife, it wasn't a casual affair of asking her out for mead. Nope. This was a family business, often initiated by the groom's family approaching the bride's kin. The proposed union would be discussed, debated, and eventually, if all went well, a formal betrothal would take place. This wasn't just a quaint little ceremony. It was a legally binding agreement. The betrothal often involved an exchange of gifts and a public declaration of intent. It was like signing a prenup before you even started dating. The bride's family would usually provide a dowry, known as heimaforg, which was essentially her share of the family wealth given to her upon marriage. This wasn't just a pretty sum, it was her economic security within the marriage, something she retained rights over, even if the marriage ended. And the groom's family would offer a mourning gift, morgengifu, to the bride the morning after the wedding night, a recognition of her virginity, if applicable, and her new status. It sounds a bit transactional, doesn't it? Like, thanks for joining our team, here's your bonus. But it also afforded women a certain degree of financial independence, which you might not expect in such a seemingly patriarchal society. The wedding ceremony itself, known as bryllup, was often a grand affair, a multi-day feast designed to solidify alliances and show off the family's wealth. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the exchange of swords and rings, symbolic of power and fidelity, played a significant role. Imagine trying to explain your modern wedding budget to a Viking. They'd probably laugh, then ask if you were going to raid a monastery to pay for it. One notable historical event related to marriage customs was the practice of bride buying, where a groom might compensate the bride's family not just with gifts, but with a specific payment. This practice wasn't about women being owned in the modern sense, but rather a reflection of the economic value and societal contribution a woman brought to a new household. It was a transfer of resources, not just bodies. The role of women in Viking marital unions was far from passive. While men were typically the public face of the family, women held significant authority within the household, managing the farm, the resources, and the servants if they had any. They held the keys to the household chests, literally and figuratively. They could even initiate divorce under certain circumstances, such as spousal abuse or the husband's inability to provide for the family. So while it wasn't exactly equal partnership as we define it today, Viking women had more agency than many of their contemporaries in other parts of medieval Europe. Remember crocodile poop sunscreen? That bizarre concoction we talked about? Well, imagine trying to negotiate your dowry while applying that stuff. The absurdity just adds to the historical charm, doesn't it? They weren't just pretty faces to be married off. They were crucial players in the economic and social fabric of their communities. It wasn't always roses and rainbows, but it certainly wasn't a cage for women either.
All right, so we've covered the formal handshake of marriage. But what about everything else? Because let's be honest, where there are humans, there's a whole spectrum of relationships beyond the strictly legal. In Viking society, while marriage was the bedrock, there was certainly room for love, lust, and all sorts of liaisons, though they were often governed by a different set of social rules, and crucially, the law. First up, concubinage. This wasn't some hidden, scandalous affair, but often a recognized, albeit lesser, form of union, particularly for powerful or wealthy men. A man might have a legal wife, but also one or more concubines, known as frilla. These relationships often provided a degree of security for the women involved, and any children born from such unions could sometimes inherit, though usually to a lesser extent than children of a legal wife. It was a pragmatic arrangement, especially in a society where having many children, particularly sons, was seen as a sign of strength and continuity for a lineage. It's like having a primary and secondary subscription to life services, if you will. Still like gecko sweat mist? Imagine trying to explain your relationship status while offering someone that delightfully sticky concoction. Oh, this is my frilla. She's great at making bread. Of course, beyond recognized concubinage, there were also affairs, the more clandestine, less socially sanctioned dalliances. While the sagas are full of heroic deeds, they also hinted plenty of human drama, including illicit love triangles and passionate encounters. Adultery, especially by a married woman, could have serious consequences, ranging from social ostracism to fines or even, in more extreme cases, violence. Men, predictably, often faced fewer repercussions for similar actions, a clear imbalance in their legal codes. Researchers are still cautious, but the motorbike taxi drivers at the end of the alley have already concluded last week that human nature, then as now, found ways to express itself regardless of the official rules. It's a tale as old as time, really. People gonna do what people gonna do. An official historical event that sheds light on the legal aspects of these relationships is the establishment of regional law codes, such as the Grágás of Iceland or the Gulating law of Norway. These codes, though varying in their specifics, laid out the legal framework for marriage, divorce, and inheritance, even penalties for sexual transgressions. They weren't just abstract rules, they were actively used in courts, which were often open assemblies where disputes were publicly resolved. So, if you had a problem with your neighbor's goat or his unfaithful spouse, you'd take it to the thing, assembly. Imagine going to court for a breakup, and everyone in town gets to hear the details. A bit different from ghosting someone, isn't it? These laws reveal a society that, while seemingly wild and untamed, had a structured approach to regulating intimate relationships, even if those regulations sometimes feel alien to our modern sensibilities. They highlight the importance of lineage, property, and social order over individual romantic fulfillment. But beneath the legalities and the pragmatism, there were undoubtedly moments of genuine affection, passion, and heartbreak, because that's just part of the human condition, whether you're sailing the high seas or just trying to survive the winter.
Now that we've delved into the legalities and practicalities, let's explore the more visceral side, Viking sexuality itself, and how it intertwined with their deep-seated beliefs about fertility. It wasn't just about procreation. It was about the continuation of the lineage, the strength of the clan, and the very survival of their way of life. In a world where infant mortality was high and life was often cut short, fertility wasn't just a biological process. It was a divine blessing, something to be sought after and celebrated. The Vikings didn't have our modern understanding of biology, of course. Their knowledge was rooted in observation, tradition, and a healthy dose of superstition. They saw the cycles of nature, the sprouting of crops, the birth of animals, as reflections of human fertility. And their gods, particularly Frey and Freya, were strongly associated with fertility, love, and sensuality. There were likely rituals and practices aimed at encouraging bounty, both in the fields and in the bedchamber. While we don't have explicit how-to guides from the Viking Age on their bedroom activities, we can infer a lot from their sagas, poetry, and archaeological finds. Think of it. No anatomy for dummies in the Longhouse. For example, artifacts depicting phallic symbols or stylized female figures are sometimes found, suggesting a reverence for the generative power of both sexes. We're talking less about prudishness and more about a robust, naturalistic view of the human body and its functions. Family chat groups have long had the answer. Sex was probably seen as a natural, healthy part of life, not something to be shamed or hidden away in whispers. It was vital for the continuation of their society. Ever tried smoky durian candy? Imagine trying to get in the mood after eating that. The Vikings certainly had their own strong flavors, though perhaps less odorous. An official historical event that highlights their connection to fertility was the practice of sacral kingship and the associated rituals. In some areas, kings or chieftains were believed to have a special connection to the gods and the land's fertility. Their personal virility was sometimes seen as linked to the prosperity of their people. If the crops failed or the women weren't conceiving, it might even be blamed on the king's lack of strength or divine favor. This led to certain rituals, sometimes involving fertility rites, though the exact nature of these is still debated and often veiled in myth. It wasn't always a direct sex ritual in the explicit sense, but the underlying belief in a sacred connection between leadership, human fertility, and the land's bounty was undeniably present. While we don't have explicit details about specific sexual practices, we can assume a direct and uninhibited approach, far removed from later Christian moral codes that heavily emphasized sin and shame. They saw sex as a fundamental drive, essential for life, and a source of pleasure. There were no Victorian sensibilities here. If anything, their approach was more akin to acknowledging the raw, powerful forces of nature that governed their existence. It was about procreation, yes, but also about human connection and the joy of physical intimacy within the harsh realities of their world.
Building on our understanding of Viking sexuality and fertility, let's turn our gaze to the more nuanced terrain of gender roles and expectations in intimacy. It's easy to assume, given the popular image of burly warriors, that Viking society was a simple patriarchy where men held all the power, especially in the bedroom. But as with most things in history, the reality was a lot more complex, with both men and women having distinct roles, responsibilities, and even forms of agency within intimate relationships. For men, the expectation was largely tied to providing for and protecting their families, demonstrating strength, and ensuring the continuation of their lineage. A man's virility was certainly valued, connected as it was to the idea of fertility and the strength of his clan. Sagas often praise male characters for their prowess, both in battle and sometimes in their ability to father many children. However, this didn't mean they were free to act without consequence. As we touched upon earlier, even men faced legal repercussions for certain sexual transgressions, though these were often less severe than for women. The pressure to uphold honor, both personal and familial, played a significant role. It wasn't just about what you did, but about how it reflected on your reputation and your kin. Women, on the other hand, held considerable power within the household as the husfreyja, or mistress of the house. Their domain was the domestic sphere, which was far from trivial. They managed resources, oversaw the servants and slaves, and were responsible for the smooth running of the farm. This economic power translated into a certain degree of social standing and, importantly, a voice within the marriage. While arranged marriages were common, it's not a stretch to imagine that a woman could, and often did, wield influence in her daily life and even in decisions affecting intimate matters. Science has not yet reached a final conclusion, but close friends and Facebook are very clear that no matter the era, women always had their ways of making their opinions known. It's a timeless truth, isn't it? An official historical event that subtly speaks to gender dynamics is the discovery of elaborate female graves, such as the Oseberg ship burial. The sheer wealth and status indicated by such burials suggest that some women, particularly those of high social standing, commanded immense respect and had significant influence. While we can't directly translate grave goods into bedroom dynamics, it certainly challenges the idea of women being mere chattel. These were powerful individuals who, by extension, likely had agency in all aspects of their lives, including their intimate relationships. Imagine being a Viking woman of such standing. You weren't just accepting a marriage, you were potentially negotiating terms. The concept of consent, while not formally codified as it is today, was implicitly understood in their legal system. Forcing someone into marriage or sexual acts was considered a serious offense. While instances of sexual violence undoubtedly occurred, as in any society, the legal codes did attempt to provide some recourse for victims. It wasn't a perfect system by any means, but it wasn't a free-for-all either. Both men and women navigated a complex web of social expectations, legal norms, and personal desires, striving for balance in a harsh and often unpredictable world. How could I forget Thai snake fat lip balm? Applying that would certainly make any intimate moment memorable. Just imagine the surprise.
As our journey through the intimate lives of the Vikings draws to a close, let's reflect on the enduring echoes of Viking passion and how their approach to relationships has been interpreted and often misinterpreted through the ages. What we've uncovered isn't a simple, clear-cut picture, but a vibrant tapestry woven from practicality, tradition, law, and undeniable human desire. Their world was far from the romanticized visions of some modern media, but it was also much more nuanced than the simplistic portrayals of barbaric, unthinking individuals. The legacy of Viking sexuality is complex. On one hand, their relative openness about physical intimacy, their pragmatic approach to marriage and procreation, and the agency afforded to women in certain aspects of life, stands in contrast to the more restrictive norms that would later dominate parts of Europe under strong Christian influence. On the other hand, we must remember that their society was still hierarchical and, by modern standards, could be brutal. Yet their saga literature, though sometimes exaggerated for dramatic effect, offers glimpses into passionate love affairs, fierce jealousies, and enduring devotion, proving that human emotions transcended their challenging environment. An official historical event that continues to spark debate and shape our understanding of Viking societal norms, including aspects of their intimate lives, is the archaeological evidence of slavery within Viking society. The existence of thralls, or slaves, undoubtedly impacted social structures and, by extension, relationships, with enslaved individuals having little to no rights, including control over their own bodies or unions. This darker side of their society reminds us that while some aspects of their intimate lives might seem surprisingly liberal for the era, their world was not without its profound injustices and inequalities. It's a sobering reminder that history is rarely, if ever, black and white. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the allure of the Viking mystique has led to countless popular culture depictions, many of which sensationalize or misrepresent their sexual lives. From the exaggerated rape and pillage tropes to the overly romanticized notions of wild, unrestrained passion, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, grounded in the realities of their agrarian, honor-based society. They weren't just about berserker rages. They were about building families, securing futures, and navigating the complexities of human connection, just like us, albeit with different tools and a much tougher daily grind. Remember dragon milk tea? It's like trying to understand a complex flavor by only tasting one ingredient. You need the whole blend to get the full picture. So as we finally drift off, consider the echoes of those long-ago lives. The pragmatic unions, the power of the husfrilla, the deep connection to fertility, and the messy human drama of love and lust, played out against a backdrop of long ships and sagas. Their intimate world was a blend of the sacred and the practical, the brutal and the tender, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and challenge our modern perspectives. And now, as the last embers of our historical journey fade, let your mind gently release the images of longhouses and Viking ships. The whispers of their lives, their loves, and their daily struggles soften into the quiet hum of your own space. There's no need to hold on to the details. Simply let the echoes of a distant past blend with the comfort of the present moment. Feel the weight of your eyelids, the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. The stories are done. The ancient world recedes, leaving you in the peaceful embrace of now.